We look at the evolution of SharePoint, the current market statistics of where the product in the market usability stands at, look at the job trends in the market, salary index, because that's a very job trend, and salary index is what career people look at, because mostly participants who come on to SharePoint will be asking, okay, if I take it up and spend my effort and my time learning it, what benefits do I get? So we'll have a discussion on that. Position SharePoint in the market, and as a career option, we'll move on to understanding what the SharePoint platform itself is, right? The big question, what is SharePoint? So I'll try to explain SharePoint from its main components, which makes up the product called SharePoint. Move on to logical and physical architecture, not in a very detailed way, but at least to make you understand and feel comfortable for the product, because most people have an averseness to SharePoint when it comes to learning it, because it's all in pieces. When you try to get information about SharePoint, it's all in bits and pieces everywhere. If you get a book, it'll be focusing on one, on workflow management or on website creations and things like that. But that holistic approach, right? That's what I intend to do using this webinar, so that people feel comfortable. As a developer, you feel comfortable to say, okay, this is something I can take up, right? And also to communicate to you what will be your effort level and learning curve, okay? Understanding logical and physical architecture, learn the database types, programming models. A very important slides coming at the end of halfway through the presentation will be the programming model types we can get on to development on client support, developer tools used, and the apps. That's the latest which has come into SharePoint 2003 from a development point of view. And we'll have an interactive session in which every slide I'll move through. We'll have technical aspects and other discussions we are having. Anytime you have a question, please use the questions window to shoot me questions. I can see it on my screen, and I'll do my best to answer it. But if it's a generic question regarding course and other details and support and things like that, we'll have a question and answer session at the end. If it's a technical question, particular screen when we're discussing a technical aspect, please, I'll take up the question right away, or we'll have a question and answer summary session at the end. Okay. I hope our stage is set to move on. So objectives are clear for our webinar for the next 1 hour. So you have all these points we'll be going through. Okay, let's move ahead. Evolution of SharePoint. On this slide, I've just listed the various versions that I've released across the years, because SharePoint at every release, it changes its face, okay? Every product of SharePoint, if you look at it, the content, it has many more features added to it, right? So it has grown bigger and bigger during its evolution, starting from 2001 when it was released as a web portal product, right? If an organization wants an intranet and an extranet or an internet, basically, you could use SharePoint to host your contents for the web, internal websites, things like that. It was a very basic product. It came from a product which Microsoft had earlier called Content Management Server, right? That's a predecessor to SharePoint, basically. Content Management Server was revamped as SharePoint Portal Server 2001. It was a minor success. People was very reluctant to go into 2001 because the first product coming in. Then we had SharePoint 2003, where the same features of portal capabilities were kept. Portal, when I say you, typically I believe you all understand that. Portals are typically websites. It could be an intranet or an internet facing or an extranet for business users. Okay? In SharePoint 2003, right, the next version which was released, the capabilities of collaboration, right? The users using the intranet within the organization to collaborate on document sharings and things like that, features were introduced. 2007, web content management was introduced into the portal, and we had the portal and collaboration, and web content management came into 2007 version. Plus, the architecture of the product changed, right? The architecture, the product itself, and the core itself was developed using .NET framework technologies, okay, from Office SharePoint 2007. You could see the name also has a very minor changes, because the vision for the product from Microsoft also has changed across the years. Initially, they want what they thought about SharePoint. As more and more organizations adopted SharePoint, the vision also changed. The requirements came in. They modified the product to suit those requirements, and it kept growing. The functionalities of the product kept growing. When we move further in the next slides, we'll see where it stands today as a product and what are the capabilities at this point of time. So at the version of 2007, right, the major change was the re-architecture, saying that the core engine was changed using the .NET framework. Then we had SharePoint Server 2010, and now we moved on to SharePoint Server 2013, right? When at the current stage, what the major change you will feel in SharePoint, people who have been working in SharePoint or new to SharePoint, right, is that SharePoint supports every open standards out there. Development in SharePoint has become very defined, right? You don't have to be as a developer. The first question is how much do I need to learn? Your learning curve is very much minimized, right? Because it's even though it's done on .NET Framework platform, right? You could use your Javas and your other core technologies to work in SharePoint very easily, because when we move to the programming model slides later, I'll explain to you how that has come in. So it's become more of an open standard platform today. That's what SharePoint 2013 feature lists are. So I hope you got a good idea of the evolution patterns of SharePoint across the years, right? It started as a very simple portal product, and let's we are at today, right? The combined feature slides I'll come to within the next couple of slides. I'll reach there, but we have a slide here which summarizes some market statistics for SharePoint today. Okay. On the slide, it's very clearly written. We have it's a very big statistics actually. More than 80% of Fortune 500 companies use SharePoint Server in some capacity. Now that some capacity I'll come to later on the SharePoint functionality slide, okay? Because SharePoint to many people are many things, okay? It could be a content management system, it could be a workflow process, business process management system. It could be many other aspects to each person. So let's have a discussion here. So you can see the acceptability of this product across the years. In the last decade, right, it has, because typically the product goes into larger organizations, okay, where you have thousands of employees and things like that. That's where a product like SharePoint makes sense. So you have a market penetrations of around 8 in Fortune 500 companies. And the peak of SharePoint was when the product SharePoint 2007 and 10 released. The adaptability increased a lot, and now it's more or less a stabilized stage where you can see the next point, the third point over there. Microsoft is adding close to around 20,000 new users every day. New users means new licenses, right? Organizations are buying new user licenses every day at a rate of 20,000 new licenses a day. So the product is a massive hit, and any company using SharePoint, it has grown within the company, add on more and more functionalities, more requirements, and more requirements mean more jobs, right, for IT professionals. So it's a very safe bet. If you want to take up SharePoint as a career move, it's a very safe bet. And today, the next couple of slides, I'll be showing you the job trends and as well as the salary grade available for this particular. Next slide. It's basically a salary index comparison. Naturally, when the skill set is scarce and hard to find, the salary will be higher than what other job profiles will be having. I have a quick link indication for you to see that. Ideally, out there in the market, if you search for job as SharePoint developer, because in SharePoint, from a developer's point of view, you could have various jobs in SharePoint. It's not like SharePoint developer, he develops everything. You have SharePoint people developing SharePoint only in the front end, which is basically the UI designers. You have the core system developers who create components and apps and things like that. So various job profiles available. So, and it depends on the level that you have gone into depth of learning this particular product. .NET developer and this index level, and basically looking at the market, you have around 35% increase in salary directly when you look at the job opportunities out there, right? So you have the salary index slide. Previous slides basically was to pitch the product of where it stands in the market, as I was telling you, because it's a very in high demand product out there. As an industry, you have a real scarcity for people who know this particular domain. Okay, now we're moving into slides where we are trying to position SharePoint to what it is, right? The basic question always, what is SharePoint, if I may ask, right? This slide summarizes the main component functionalities of SharePoint. See, like it shows you, SharePoint Enterprise Portal Solution, which offers a wide range of integrated services, and that the graphical image out there, it shows you at the center there's a platform service, which is what we call SharePoint. There's nothing as a component there, but management workspaces, site model, storage, security topology. These are all the common functionalities, but the main engines, right? SharePoint is always considered to be many products bundled into one. That's what SharePoint ideally is called. So we have enterprise content management, you have business process management, business intelligence product, search, enterprise social networking, right? The main components, the main core components. So organizations using SharePoint could be using it for either one of these or a couple of these or all of them basically. The point what Microsoft succeeded using SharePoint is that any organization which takes up SharePoint to use basically for content management, let's say, while it's being used, they'll start using the other components slowly, add on more capable, because once they understand the product and what facilities it can provide them, right, it just branches into the organization, right? The SharePoint across these years has grown basically. So the main categories, I'll be explaining to you each of these main categories into its subcomponents, what comes into each. Enterprise content management, business process management, business intelligence, enterprise search, enterprise social networking. As a core level functionality points, okay? Now, let's take the first one, enterprise content management. If you say content management, what all are the facilities provided in that? Enterprise content management includes what you see on my slide now: document management, web content management, records management, workforce management, digital asset management, and managed metadata. Right, there are other products in the market which compete with SharePoint only on these points, okay, because you have document management solutions available independently, but you know, it's a competitor for SharePoint on this one particular point here. If you look at document management, one point on document management, basically document, you know, every organization has tons and tons of electronic documents in email formats or in stored document formats in your office files, other project files. So managing these documents in a central place so that people catalog them fine, search them, review them, keep version tracking, it's a huge job. It's a very complex process, but you need a product for that. So just one of them is document management. You have web content management, which is again a part where you publish your company's data on intranets, extranets, right? Internet present sites, business sites, intranet sites, internet sites, extra sites, right? All four different variations you could control from the same place and manage the content of all those publications from one central product, from the enterprise content management facility and the web content management, right? I'm just discussing each point right now. I told you about the document management here, content management. You have records management. Now, document and record, right? People who have been in the field will know the difference. Otherwise, a record is basically a document only, right? It's a document which basically has a legal or a business or regulatory need, right? Saying that some documents in the company, like agreements and legal agreements between other business partners, they need to be retained across the years, right? So you have retention policy specified. So documents, because they are also Word documents or PDF documents, but when they have a legal and retention policy scenarios, you go into records management. Workforce management is centralized management of tasks in the organization, right? Tasks which can be lying across your to-do tasks, basically, right? Tasks to complete across Exchange servers, project servers, SharePoint server itself. They can all be consolidated and managed in each person's private site. When you get in SharePoint, every user in SharePoint will have their own personal site. So consolidating all the to-do tasks lying disparately across systems can be brought in one place. Digital asset management, that's a new feature in SharePoint 2003. Coming from the 2010 version, digital assets management is basically all your audio video files, right? And today, web recordings and video recordings, presentations, new employee files, all these, they are all digital media. Specific content types are specified for digital means, and you can have inbuilt HTML5 players in your web parts or the portals to play them back, and also put policies of what should be available to what group of users, or at the asset management level. Okay, you don't have to convert this and store it in a different place. It could be in SharePoint. Policies could be specified of how they are stored and mapped to which user group. managed metadata. Metadata is basically data about data, right? Store a document, you ideally give what? When you store documents, ideally when I have a file, you'll say what date I'm storing it in, from which department, meant for which purpose, all that. So you have standardized terms specified in the system so that when you store data in files, it comes, you have to choose so that the structured search happens based on that. So even in enterprise, what we are seeing is just one portion, one section of the SharePoint platform, which is enterprise content management, in which we have all these subsets to go through. Okay, I'm just showing the functionality and capabilities of this product. In content management, you have document, web, records, workforce, digital asset, and managed metadata. Business process management is basically workflow engine. Every organization has authorization policies saying that if some task has to be approved, it has to go through this chain. You have a graphical representation of a simple workflow process on your right side of the slide. Document updated, right? All this, it goes through a chain. Depends on what action is taken, it moves to the next levels, right? From a developer point of view, the workflow manager, like the workflow engine in SharePoint, is built on the Windows Workflow Foundation 4.5 version, which again is built on top of Windows Communication Foundation, which again is built on .NET Framework, right? So that's a core developer point of view where the workflow manager stands, and SharePoint Workflow is considered one of the best workflow manager products out there in the market today. And it's from a developer's, we have a slide which talks from a developer's point of view how we look at a workflow. We'll have a slide coming up later in which when you hear the function capabilities of the product, you might be amazed over all this I have to take in. But believe me, when you look in a structured manner one by one, the product can look very simple. Coming up later, I'll show you simplified slides of these. Here we have business process management. We have a logical architecture of business process management on your graphical image in the slide, and for some key features, right, of workflow engine. The best part you can listen to as a developer who's interested to create workflows in SharePoint is that in SharePoint 2013, the version, because in previous versions it was quite a bit hard to create them because there's a lot of coding involved. You need to write a lot of codes, but now it's all templatized. You have the first point, workflows are fully declarative, right? You can use your tools like Visual Studio or SharePoint Designer to create your workflows, and in both of these tools, right, and both of these tools use fully declarative method, right? Drag drop pieces, connect them, specify your logic basically. Only the expression logic has to be specified or what the next steps has to be taken up. So it's a very, very functional and high, as you can see, it's allow high density and multi-tenancy. Multi-tenancy means the same workflow can work for different users in different ways. That's a tenant. Tenant means a group of users which uses a common product. So you specify one workflow, and based on user profiles, the workflow behaves and works differently for each user group. So it's a very advanced workflow model, but it's again declarative. So you just have to understand the core concepts about the workflow. Doing it is not that hard as before. Okay. Allows for tracking, monitoring, instance management. As I said, provides for expressive workflow. Expressive workflow is basically drag drop, and the core expressions is very easy to debug and monitor the workflows from a maintenance point of view also. Okay. And the tools you can use to develop workflows in SharePoint is SharePoint Designer, Visual Studio, Visio 2013. The next core topic on SharePoint, BI, is business intelligence, which basically is dashboards, right? It's centralized reports, visual representation of the core organization status, data display, and also you have many advanced engines working for that. You have Excel, BIS, Excel services, Visio, Microsoft SQL Server integration, because SQL Server's reporting server is integrated to SharePoint. You have these core engines. You have in-memory BI engine, which is basically called Vertipack, because as SharePoint delivers today the best BI compared to #1 display on BI reports. You can have 3D graphics, right, based on your HTML5 and CSS latest version. You have 3D graphics on your reports. You could play around with these, like drag customizable reports from the user's point of view, right? Power View add-ins for Excel. Some of you might be familiar with these components working with other technologies, but they're all integrated seamlessly in SharePoint reports. Okay. And report creation from a developer's point of view, you don't have much to do because report engine is standalone, and you can customize reports. Of course, definitely you can customize. On a report creation level, it's basically a power user's job, not a developer's job in SharePoint, ideally. As we all know, enterprise search, right? We all know Google, right? So everybody's trying to create something as good as Google to create search results. But here we are talking about enterprise search. The term enterprise itself is within the organization. The contents you store onto SharePoint, and SharePoint contents could come from any varied systems. Okay, it doesn't have to be all Microsoft systems. You have connectors into all, even big data. Data can be searched and indexed onto SharePoint catalogs, and you could search across all that. So search index, the slide here, enterprise search. Just a logical architecture of the components working to make search happen in SharePoint. If you have a quick look at that, we have as a starting point, we have the content sources on top. Content sources, we have HTTP, file shares, other SharePoint sites and web collections, user profiles, headquarters, Documentum, many other sources. You combine, crawl across all these sources, grab the content, so store onto your content databases, index the content, and the client search happens from, as you can see from the right side, client application, query processing engine, index component. So once you learn this architecture, each and every component highlighted on this particular slide as a logical architecture is customizable. You could add your own crawl options to that. Your content processing parameters and search words and everything can be so it's a hugely customizable option for SharePoint Enterprise Search. Okay. I just want to come back to this slide so that because after this we'll be going more into as from a developer's point of view onto SharePoint. So basically to explain SharePoint to you, if anyone asks what is SharePoint, the question, as I always tell you, is not easy because SharePoint is a combination of these main functionality. It's a content management product. It's a business process management. It has BI capabilities. It has enterprise search, enterprise social networking. Social networking, you all know your wikis, blogs, all that, okay? All what you use today in your current web environment, right? For social networking, you have equivalent products in SharePoint for your enterprise level social networking options. Okay, so we have to show you what SharePoint as a product capabilities looks for. Moving on to the slides we were earlier. A quick look at the logical architecture. Don't let these slides scare you because once you get into a step-by-step approach into learning SharePoint from a developer's point of view, these are very simple. Basically, this again is the logical architecture for search, right? Internally, which components, as you can see, front end comes in, web parts, right? It's a common term in SharePoint which says a logical piece of application. Web part is basically one piece of application working independently. That term of web part is what has grown into something in 2013's version called apps, SharePoint Apps. We'll come into that in very shortly. You have a physical architecture of SharePoint deployment. As you know, SharePoint is a very resource-hungry product, okay? Because it has tons of data to store, to crawl, to map, thousands of websites within it, right? So you have it's a huge product basically. So it's always in a scalable environment where you have each layer, like you can see the web server and the SharePoint front-end server separated. You have the administration websites separated, the databases, the primary databases, and the Active Directory DNS, or in different layers. And each layer of these can have hundreds of servers. Okay, each layer you're seeing in this particular physical architecture diagram, each layer could have hundreds of servers within it. Okay. The logical architecture point. the databases that makes up the product on SharePoint as a backend, because as a developer, you would be interested in this slide to see what databases at the backend. You have system databases, just like in SQL Server, you have system databases. SharePoint system is configuration, central administration, and many content databases. That's a system databases. For you, each user profiles you create, you can have service databases for that. For social networking, you have social tagging databases, because at the end of the day, the data what we talk when you see through SharePoint is stored at its backend in server databases. You have it supports SQL 2008 R2, SQL 2012, and SQL Server 2014 database also. This slide is just a summary of what are the database options what we have in SharePoint. Just a quick review for you. Now let's start from a developer's point of view. If you have to take up SharePoint development, right? What is your first learning point to start with? These are the programming models that SharePoint supports for its own customization and creating components and applications and things like that. You have SharePoint Server Object Model, .NET Framework Client Object Model, your JavaScript Client Object Model, REST or data endpoints, representational state transfer. People who have heard of REST, right? REST is an open standard basically. It's not linked to any particular vendor. It's a software architecture guidelines for basically creating web services on the internet. And the protocol used to, when you use REST programming, because every programming language has some way to create, update, delete with the crude methodology. It uses OData protocol. Okay, so REST and OData, which is a complete open standard. All right, is supported. You have Silverlight Client Object Model, Silverlight Mobile Object Model, which because SharePoint 2013 supports mobile devices out of the box. Complete support, just it treats mobile devices as if it's a native client, not as something special. So you have specifically mobile device object model is there to create. You have Silverlight Client Object Model, and again Windows PowerShell. So as you can choose to use any of these, because if you are not from, if you are basically not even from .NET platform development background, okay, you are a Java person, right? You could use your Java skills to directly use the Java Client Object Model, because capabilities of all these, basically the first three, right? The SharePoint Server is basically based on .NET languages and .NET Framework, and .NET Client Object Model, again, as I told you, is based on .NET, but JSON has equivalent capabilities. You can create your apps in SharePoint, you can customize code and everything using Java. You don't have to learn a new syntax or anything like that. The only learning curve for you is to learn the object model, right? If you know the server object model, which is the first point on that slide, SharePoint Server Object Model. Let me just show you a quick view of Server Object Model here. This encapsulates almost the high-level aspects of all the libraries in the object model that you need to learn. You have a core library called SP Farm, which is a SharePoint farm, which will include all the servers, all the web applications, everything cycle created inside SharePoint, called SP Farm. You have SP Service, 3 equivalent layers under that: SP Service Application, SP Web Application. Under that, you have SP Site, SP Web, SP List. This is the object model. As a programmer, once you understand and start learning SharePoint, you will understand that everything you see is a list. At this rock bottom of this particular breakdown, you have SP List. List is where you have, because you go to any page on the web, you'll have some listings coming up, right? It could be product listing or some tracking, conversations, anything. It's list, and list appears in a web, and web is basically a subsite which comes in a site, and site goes to a larger, which is a web application. Then you have supporting services like workflows and everything over there, and everything belongs to an SP farm. So it's hierarchically very simple to learn this, but once you learn this object model, the technology you can work on these is what I was showing you in the previous slide, right? Once you learn this object model, the programming technologies could be SOM, CSOM, JSOM, if you want to call abbreviated versions. Basically, you can use Java, you can use .NET, you can use an open standard like REST, and any programming language that supports REST programming you could use. It completely supports the Silverlight model for mobile as well as client. When you say client object model, you don't think that there is something lacking in these object models, okay? Because whatever code you write using a client object models, when you pass this code onto the server converts it to server code and executes them. So almost all capabilities of the server code is there in this client object model. It's about you choosing which object model that you can develop SharePoint using, right? So these are basically that. So the learning curve, as I told you, because ideally the developers come from a particular background. So if your background is .NET, it's a straight line for you to come into SharePoint. If it's Java, it's again a straight line for you, okay? Okay, I have a question from one of our participants. Metadata management, do you mean big data? No, it's two different things. Big data is a current hype term out there, which basically means data which is not in relational format, not in structured cases, but spread across multiple hard disks, but you use language to query that. So that's a different way, like how Twitter stores data. They don't store data into typical relational database. They store into a big data format, right, across multiple hard disks. That's a different discussion, but metadata is not that. Metadata is a very generic term in data manipulation, which means data about data, because if you have a document, the document will have some metadata like who created it, what is the purpose of the document, what is the expiration date, what's the creation date, things like that. It's data about data, okay? I just answered one question, one of the participants short meanwhile. So being on the slide as developers, that's something I want to stress again, okay? Because the objective of we delivering this webinar for you is to make you comfortable to feel that your learning curve to SharePoint. Even though SharePoint has many functionalities out there, you don't have to take all of them at once, okay? It's step by step. If you learn SharePoint from the approach which is shown, as a developer, you always learn products from its object model, right? You don't go to learn products from top down. Typically, developers go from bottoms-up approach, right? You go to the core object model, object models here. And these terms are very straightforward. A farm means multiple SharePoint servers and all the functionalities together. Means basically one organization will have a top farm. Under the farm, you have many web applications. In each web application, you will have multiple websites, department level, okay? You'll have department level websites under which you will have context-based sites in which you will have user-level sites, and each site will be displaying something. Any display onto a web page is basically an SP list, a list. That's the object term over there. You break it down like this. Once you know the object model, you could use any of those other you could use any of the other programming models to work on SharePoint straight away, okay? Now, object model comparison. So we discussed about the various object model that programmers can use, right? You talked about server-based .NET, Java, REST or data endpoints. You could use all that. Silverlight. Just a quick comparison. It's very self-descriptive, this slide. You could just look at the points here, each of them. Object-oriented programming. Yes, because most they only know object-oriented programming because all programming languages out there use that. But you can see the REST or data, which is an open standard. It's not object-oriented. It's resource-oriented. You could read more about that on the internet, but it's not an object-oriented programming language. There's a lot of arguments on that because the code typically looks like object-oriented, but the term, it's a resource-oriented programming language. Okay, REST or data is resource-oriented. The other Java naturally and .NET are object-oriented languages. Batch processing, because code from the client, when you create your applications within SharePoint, you run custom applications and make them work. You could decide whether you want batch processing for the code or asynchronous, like the entire code has to be processed at once, like performance tuning options. And many other options you can see there. Availability of link, right? Link again is language integrated query, which is a .NET facility by which the programming language syntax itself includes the query language, right? When you want to query your backends, like SQL Server and Oracle, you could use programming language syntax. Instead of going for like SQL statement, like select star from this table where, like that, you could use programming language syntax. That's link. It was released around 5-6 years back in Visual Studio 2008, I believe. From there, we have .NET from version 3. I believe we have link option in .NET. As you can see, it's not available in JavaScript. Because instead of using link, you could directly use SQL syntax in Java. So it's not that there is something which you cannot do always. It's just a comparison, show you what possibilities and what is not. And you can just read the points: combining list, data, yes, familiarity. One major constraint is there for Java-based models, right? You cannot combine content data or search content data from different multiple web applications on the server using JavaScript client-side model. But again, you have a workaround for that, so don't worry. This is a high-level diagram which says no, but as a programmer, we always find workarounds for that. Yes, we have options. But basically, at the end of the day, my point to use at summarized point is that even if you're in .NET or Java or any other programming language and you're familiar with any of these, because these are the core topic programming languages. You have .NET, you have Java, you have open source like Rust, then it's all programming syntax, because .NET supports around 13, 14 primary programming language syntaxes. Okay, so when I say .NET, don't think it's only VB.NET and C#. Okay, in .NET itself, you have 14 language syntaxes supported. Okay, so coming on to that. This slide again for developers, right? Because when SharePoint is implemented in an organization, your job as a developer will be either customize existing options or create organization need-based applications in SharePoint, which works on top of SharePoint, right? You can create three types of applications. You can have sandbox applications, something called apps in SharePoint, or farm solutions. Now, let me tell you, sandbox is a term you have. I believe most of you have heard sandboxed applications, right? In Windows, you heard old applications runs in a sandboxed environment. Okay, sandbox environment was released in SharePoint 2010, basically, so that your custom application, because the major difficulty that Microsoft faced when they exposed SharePoint development was to create many applications on SharePoint and host it onto SharePoint engine. And most of the time, these applications are not well prepared. Means what? The developer, either knowledge level wise or otherwise, right? The application performs badly because you host an application into SharePoint, it runs in process with SharePoint. If that application goes bad, it can actually bring down your portal, right? So sandbox is an area where it's running within SharePoint, but in a controlled environment, so that even if your custom application behaves badly, it doesn't affect the overall performance of the server application. But as you can see in SharePoint 2013, sandbox solutions like previous version applications, when you bring in, it's deprecated. Basically, it will not be carried forward in the next version. So ideally, because for the stability of the product, right? Because today what we have is apps creation. SharePoint apps is basically applications. Okay, if you want to create your own standalone applications in SharePoint, apps is the ideal way to go ahead, because apps could be hosted in any third-party environment. You could host your apps in your Linux environment, but still view and run it from SharePoint. That's what the facility is. So apps can be hosted anywhere, right? We have a topic on apps coming shortly in a couple of slides. I'll explain to you that. So the decision point today in SharePoint 2013 is either when you have a development requirement, do we need to create an app or we need to create a farm solution. Farm solution is a native solution done in SharePoint, hosted in SharePoint. There are only a couple of points you can see here in the first section of the farm solution. There are only a couple of things you cannot do with an app, right? Apps cannot call server-side code, like native server-side code. You cannot access SharePoint commands are not on the same site. Apps cannot communicate with each other, because two apps to communicate with each other, you need to create third-party layers otherwise. Okay, this again programming ways to do that, but typically apps do not communicate with each other. If you want interactive applications, two applications working within SharePoint, all custom application, but they want to share data between each other, you cannot go for an app as of now. So custom themes and things like these are like very few options which cannot be done using an app. You have to go for a native solution in SharePoint, like farm solution, that's called. The native applications are called farm solutions, and any customized logic or custom applications create as apps. So three application creation options for you in SharePoint. Sandbox solutions, which again is deprecated, so it won't be carried forward to the next versions. You have to, if you have custom applications running in SharePoint 2010, when you migrate them to 2013, either you convert them to apps or you have to run them in the sandbox environment. Okay. Three options here. Slide is very self-explanatory on many points. Next slide here. Again, a comparison between them. Safety level, performance level, running cross-domain. We have a point here called, should IT pros worry over it? Okay. Because IT pros means not the developers, the administrators, because you could develop the applications and give on to the server to host them. So sandbox solutions, no, because they have their own limited authority anyway. So crashing or any bad syntaxes happening within the sandboxes won't affect the SharePoint box as such. Apps are able to do a lot via CSOM. There are some uncertainties concerning safety of running on a page with other apps, right? Because it's new technology, definitely there's a lot of need to be done. Farm solutions are the best because they are type safe, because they are server-side code running within SharePoint. So today, when we deploy the solution, SharePoint itself has an internal checking mechanism by which each parameter output of the solution is checked, so that the SharePoint product, the hosting solution itself, makes sure that the performance and other aspects are not impacted. So a lot of points on that. So this is these two slides I have basically put here for you to understand that there's a choice when you need as a developer to look at creating applications. But today, going further, sorry, 1 second, let me come back to the slide. Okay, I have a request from one of the participants to explain about resource throttling. Resource throttling is basically controlling the impact of the farm, right? How much resources will your particular application take, right? So resource throttling, you can see sandbox application runs under advanced resource management system that allows resource point allocation automatic shutdown for troubles. Because that's what is a sandbox environment meant for. Untrusted applications or application which hasn't passed quality test, right? But you need to be running on SharePoint for some reason. You put them to a sandbox environment as a controlled environment. You mean, I believe you understand what a control environment means, right? Because whatever happens in that particular environment will not affect the core system, right? Even if that application crashes also, nothing happens to your core SharePoint system, right? But again, performance will be affected because sandbox environment performance is not great, right? Because it's only allowed limited resource points, okay? Apps, you can see as a resource throttling, apps run isolated from SharePoint farm. Our apps are hosted to third party, okay? It could be hosted on a Linux server somewhere else, but linked on your web page. So for the user, they won't feel any difference. They'll see an application running when they open the portal, walk around with it. There's absolutely no issues. But the actual physical place it's running could be a third-party environment or even from the cloud, right? It could be hosted from a cloud environment. But again, as I say, if you use client object model programming in apps, right, the client code will be sent to the server for manipulation. So again, code leveraging and optimization is always required. Farm solutions, if not, and the third of them, the farm solution, which is a native solution of SharePoint, if they're not done and tested in the right way, it could be directly impacting the entire farm. So, sorry. Just a quick look here on the client support level. Means what? As a client browser, right? What is supported in SharePoint 2013? You could see the slide is very self-explanatory. Older browsers like Internet Explorer 7 and 6 and 7 are not supported, but the latest ones, right, which 8, 9, 10, 11, all these are supported as a client for SharePoint as well as mobile devices, right? It supports mobile devices natively, right? You don't have to specify any specific customization options or anything like that. The content pages, the web applications, sites you create in SharePoint, they're directly compatible across mobile devices. Plus, specifically for mobile device, you have many more options you can further customize. By default, it's compatible, okay? Client supports. From a developer's point of view, the core tools that onto doing custom solutions on SharePoint, you have Visual Studio 2012 and 13. Both versions, 2012 version to 2013 version of Visual Studio, which you can use to create custom applications. You can create apps, workflows, custom themes, almost anything on SharePoint, because SharePoint needs are basically customizing the pages which comes up, creating new custom lists and things like that. Plus, you have a new tool which is free. Visual Studio, as you know, it's not free; it's a licensed product from Microsoft. But you have SharePoint Designer, which works and feels very much if you ever have worked with the front page of Microsoft Office front page, it's very similar to that. It's all drag drop HTML tool, okay? You can create excellent workflows. Okay, SharePoint Designer is a very powerful. It's a free tool. Okay, to work on SharePoint. SharePoint Design and Visio 2013. Visio 2013 on SharePoint is specifically to work with the workflow engine. You create custom workflows and things like that in Visio. And all these are interchangeable. You could do a workflow in Visio at the initial level, then import that into Visual Studio and customize it further. Same with SharePoint Designer also. So these are the primary tools that we use to work on SharePoint. Plus, as developers, working on SharePoint, when you get into it, you have many other tools available free, right? Because as your development gets more advanced for testing, these are all like Ajax Control Toolkit, Silverlight Toolkit, Developer Dashboard. These are all free tools for as developers. You could use all of them because these are all comes on the side. Okay, when we want to work on. Okay. You have a look through that because CLR profilers, color palette tools, right, for designing, creating various colors and themes and things like that. These are all free tools available for working on SharePoint. Not on SharePoint, they can be used to work on many other .NET projects as you wish. Okay, but the core tools what we use, as we saw in the previous slide, is Visual Studio, either 2012 or 2013, SharePoint Designer, and Visio for the workflows. Okay. Next, we have a quick topic to discuss about apps. Okay, I have a request from a participant. Can you explain state machine workflow in SharePoint Designer? Okay, Himanshu, right? Okay, SharePoint supports two main categories of workflow. One is sequential and one is the state machine workflow, right? State machine workflow, because the difference between sequential is that each step, when you create the workflow, each step has to complete with a flag so the next step executes. In state machine workflow, it's not sequential, it's asynchronous. Means multiple steps in the workflow can execute together based on the state of that, like on completion, that's a state, right? On completion of document, on a particular time, after a particular time has elapsed. So you could create constraints like that. So the state of that particular artifact, in a workflow you can call it artifact. A particular artifact changes, it works like that. So state machine, there's two different types of workflow. In the state machines, it's basically asynchronous, means multiple steps can execute at the same time, and that too not in a particular order, right? So when you have a business requirement, typically matching a state machine, we can do that. Yes, Himanshu, your next question, can we create it through Designer? SharePoint, of course you can. SharePoint Designer can create sequential as well as state machine workflows. And it's very straightforward, believe me, because it's all declarative. And Microsoft over the years, right, because the product has been there for more than a decade now, feedback has come in so that almost all possible business scenarios are there available as drag-drop templates for you. Almost all. Although if it's not, you have custom action. You could create a custom action and put your just expressions inside that to go further with the coding level. So, Himanshu, yes, you can use state machine workflow, create them using Designer also. Okay. Coming up to the next slide here, basically an explanation of what are apps. As I told you, the new term, a short form for application, are standalone or custom solutions for SharePoint, runs entirely outside the SharePoint process, right? And creating an app, you could use any level of coding functionality. We learned all the programming functionalities earlier, and you can host it separately. So you don't have to take up the SharePoint resources to run that particular app, right? The app could even be hosted from a cloud, okay? It's a framework for encapsulating functionality within a SharePoint site, because when you look at a SharePoint site, you have many components running within it. Each component can be a different app. Each of those components can be running in a different environment also, right? It could be across the web or in your organization environment itself on a separate platform or a separate server or things like that. So it's a completely free model. That's what basically the objective is. And the future of development on SharePoint is also app-based. Microsoft recommends everybody moving on to apps, basically for a reason that it doesn't destabilize the server because it runs on a different physical hardware. right? So the core SharePoint settings and functionalities and resources are not utilized and manipulated by these third-party applications. So it's an excellent functionality because it's based on open standards, right? As I told you, the object models are there, but again, you have all the like REST APIs or data or auth, right? All these authorization protocols. There's a slide which we have just for information's sake for you. The same features listed in a graphical format so that like what our apps is: automation, integration, they are standalone, and you can customize and extend them to any particular need that you want to do. So the way forward in SharePoint is, development is basically either create your custom applications in as an app or farm solution. Farm solution runs natively within the server, so further on administrators and people taking care of the SharePoint environment will be very reluctant to create SharePoint functions unless it's very correctly and tightly made, because it can directly affect the performance of servers. All other applications and custom solutions you create using apps. And app development, don't think it's very tough. It's very straightforward. You have templates available for almost all scenarios to create them. Okay, or you can create it from scratch using open standards like REST. Okay. App hosting models. These are the various methods. If you have an application or an app of SharePoint created, to host it, right? Hosting it means you want to make it available for SharePoint environment, right? So these are three architecture approaches. There are three options in that. The first two are categorized as one, which is cloud-based apps, right? Cloud-based, you all understand what the term cloud is. It's a remote environment which works according to the software as a service and infrastructure as a service, right? SSAS or LAS, right? Infrastructure IaaS, like infrastructure as a service and software as a service, right? These are cloud-based systems where the hardware, software, everything is hosted on a remote entity, and you can just directly use the functionality across the web. You could host your applications externally on a cloud, right? It's provider hosted or auto hosted apps, or your apps could be hosted locally within SharePoint itself. SharePoint hosted apps, right? You create an isolated subweb, right? That's the term. That's basically a step to create it. Subweb, and use that to host your apps within SharePoint itself. Okay, so hosted or auto hosted apps like Windows Azure clouds or any other cloud you could use for that. So